Welcome to the bright side of longevity. Join host Dr. Roger Landry along with co-host Danielle Pailly and guests as they discuss the bright side of getting older through healthy longevity. Guided by research, this lighthearted and educational show will leave you with practical ways to brighten your life's journey. Toni Bator is a certified neurodiversity and positive psychology coach who specializes in enhancing well-being and performance for professionals and leaders by addressing stress management, resilience, and burnout prevention. With a diverse client portfolio spanning global industries such as IT, healthcare, finance, and more, Toni has coached luminaries at companies including Slack, Salesforce, Amazon, and Planned Parenthood. As a member and speaker of the Stability Network, she champions mental health de-stigmatization and offers positive psychology and well-being coaching. Holding certifications from the ICF and the College of Executive Coaching, and with training in neurodiversity, she provides holistic coaching that creates a ripple effect across clients' lives. With an MS in organizational leadership and a BS in psychology, her commitment to service is exemplified through affiliations like the Asperger Autism Professional Coaching Association, and she leverages decades of experience. She's partnered with Spring Health and BetterUp as a contract wellness and care coach. She has also partnered with the Positive Psychology Coaching and Diversity Institute and the Asperger Autism Network to empower thriving. Today's topic is how to create an inclusive environment for neurodiverse populations.
Well, welcome everybody to the bright side of longevity. I am here with my esteemed colleague, Danielle. Good morning, Danielle. How are you?
Great, Dr. Roger. Great to be here with you.
You are. And I got to thank you for connecting us to our guest today, Toni, because I'm not sure that we would have crossed paths otherwise. So I'm very happy that you're here, Toni. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Roger and Danielle. And it's an honor to be here. I look forward to our conversation. I'm very excited.
Well, for your expertise, but also for what you do for others, it's our honor. Thank you for having the time, putting aside the time to talk to us. And we want to get your message out there. It's a good one.
Thank you so much.
Well, we can get right into it. Certainly, could you begin by telling the listeners a little bit more about your work? But during that, I'm sure that you will define neurodiversity, which is very important.
Absolutely. Well, I started out with a career in the social service field. I worked with a variety of populations, from homeless families to adults with chronic mental illness, adolescents with behavioral issues. And actually, I was involved in taking individuals out of institutions back in the day who were placed in their the Department of Mental Health and also through the Department of Developmental Services. Yeah. So
that was quite a beginning, and but it got you here. In any case, I think as a physician, I see people, they're sick, I get them better. What you're doing is so much more complex, and in my mind, very difficult. And again, hats off to you for that. So, how would you define neurodiversity? That's a major, I think, aspect of what you do.
Yeah, neurodiversity. It's actually a social movement and a concept. And it was invented by Judy Singer in the 1990s. And it suggests that neurological differences are the results of natural variations in humans. So conditions such as autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyslexia, they're not considered disorders under neurodiversity to be cured, but are variations of the brain So the thought is, our individuals who are neurodivergent, their brains are wired differently. And the movement promotes understanding and of acceptance and support for all neurotypes. There's no pathologizing.
Maybe it's the beginning of an even larger movement because we all are wired differently and we all see the world differently. And, if we starting here and being successful here, maybe we'll all accept each other. And wouldn't that be a wonderful place?
That truly would be. Unfortunately, I think we have a long way to go.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Well, even where you're starting is so difficult. Given the entrenched opinions, this week I've had to focus for a number of reasons on mindset. Fixed mindset versus growth,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so much of what we see, social media and everything, is a fixed mindset, and it's violent, it's destructive, it's deadly, and wow, it seems to be growing in strength rather than going the other way, at least on social media. So again,
yeah.
I'm glad that there are people like you, Toni, and others out there and who are in the trenches making sure that we get good and limit the damage that all this other stuff is doing.
Yeah, yeah. And I actually stumbled into this niche because I worked at a psychosocial clubhouse for individuals with chronic mental illness. And the whole premise was that there shouldn't be any difference between those who are the clients and those who are the staff. So the members, as they were called, they helped the staff run the clubhouse. They did the billing, they did the intakes, and it was all strength based. And that's when I was like, this is incredible. This is how it should be, right? It's not about labels and diagnoses. It's about working together and walking in there and not being able to distinguish who is staff and who's a member.
Strength based, I love that. I mean, that's an approach for any leader. I certainly got it in the military, and just for sort of tapping into all the resources that we have as a species, and or in an organization or in a group or a family or whatever.
So we'd like to talk more about your coaching work with neurodiverse individuals, if that's okay. We talked a little bit about it. In our case, we've worked for a couple decades with adults who are retired. Now, some of these people are discovering for the first time that they're either on the autism spectrum, that they're neurodiverse. And in the past, they didn't know. They thought something was wrong, but they didn't know what it was. So what advice would you give them to help them understand what this means for themselves and also articulate to others what they need for themselves?
Great question, Danielle. And the first response that I hear quite often is there are mixed emotions that can be both validating and overwhelming. Validating in that, looking back on their life, they say, I knew something wasn't right, and this explains it, this diagnosis. Overwhelming and a sense of grief in that, why didn't someone help me? Why didn't someone see this or do something for me? As individuals with neurodiverse profiles, they have endured years of feeling different, a lifetime of experience that caused shame, confusion, frustration, and isolation. And so I think the first recommendation I have is to accept those feelings, that a validation, like, okay, this does make sense, and the loss. And
I hope this opens us up to a greater understanding overall. I can think of in my youth being more introverted, not that you would know by the way I come across on the show, where I'd go to parties and it's like, I just need 10 minutes away from everybody, and I'd go off on my own and people would think, wow, that's so weird. What's wrong with you? And you think, oh, why am I different from everybody? And I think I'm just weird. and realizing that we're all have our own unique way of communicating and interacting with the world.
Yes, exactly.
Except for teenagers, I think most of us would like to feel that we're unique in a way. Teenagers tend to want to group together, and be all
Mhm.
alike. But so it's worth celebrating, and when, as you said earlier, focus on a strength-based approach. I mean, we are. I mean, I've seen it so many times in groups that I've led.
Mhm.
This person is very good at that. Not necessarily that you would define them as neurodiverse, but they're unique individuals with certain skills, and of course, you tap into those skills, and you value that, and you give them that feedback. Wow, I mean, it makes all the difference. So
Yeah. Oh, and I was going to mention that, with coaching, I like to think of coaching as your guide on the side, right? That you help individuals to educate themselves. What does it mean to have a neurodiverse profile? To educate, to seek support, either through coaching or groups, so they can also learn to advocate for themselves and continue to grow and learn and to redefine their past.
in fact, that was our next question. Would one articulate, it very simplistically, I'm unique and I have certain skills, but I'm different from you. Is there a way that tends to be more successful, or that you would recommend to someone?
Yeah, that's probably the number one challenge that individuals have who are neurodivergent, both young and older, is the social interactions of how do I make friends? I've never had friends. I'm so lonely. People think I'm weird. They ghost me when I try to connect with them. Um, and I think the key is discernment, in that you can put yourself out there and you can be rejected and people won't accept you for who you are. The discernment in relationships of finding those people who will accept you for who you are and your idiosyncrasies and your strengths, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Don't we all do that, really, in life? So it's just a lot more of a challenge, of course, with a neurodiverse person. But, really, that's what we do. We look for those peers that enrich us and accept us, and for who we are. Wow. Mates as well as peers, everything.
Right. And you don't, there's this within the community, I'm sure you've heard of masking, that individuals who are autistic, they feel like they have to mask around neurotypicals at work, socially, and it's exhausting, it's draining. And I think that instead of masking, teaching individuals, to prepare themselves in social situations, but to be the genuine selves. I think it's good to learn how to be polite and, address people properly. But, teaching social skills, I just don't, I don't like that concept, right? Why are you going to try to train someone who, doesn't understand, and the brain just doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah, I want you to train you to be a baseball player, and that's just not your thing,
Yeah.
basically. So you brought up masking as a metaphor, but what what happened in general during COVID when everyone had to mask? Did you notice anything relative to people who were neurodiverse? Was this a comforting thing? Did it make any difference? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Um, they were thrilled to have to work remotely
Mhm.
because they didn't have to be around people. They didn't, I mean, being invited, for social situations. Oh, let's get a drink after work. I mean, that just brings, chills to them. Like, no, I don't want to associate with you. They just want to go home because they're so drained from being around people. So you're in a cubicle, there's, all this noise and the lights, and, Yeah, they love working remotely.
That makes sense, and I think there were a lot of people who were not in this category, but I think we all are in this category in some way, maybe minimally versus the people that you work with. But then I think there, at least for a while, I think a lot of people preferred it. We're seeing it with people unwilling to go back to work, but I think
Yeah,
that's more of a comfort thing than a social anxiety thing or anything like
right. They are able to get so much more done working from home, right? Throwing in that laundry, going for a jog, right? Taking your dog for a walk.
leaving your pajama bottoms on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I see Danielle thinking there.
I didn't want to diverge too much, but what was sticking with me since the beginning of this episode is when you mentioned that when people discover this about themselves, it's a relief and a grief. And it's the grief that gave me chills when you said it, particularly if we're talking about older populations, people in their 60s and 70s discovering for the first time like this aha, but it's like, why? To me, I'm still like this in my own life. How would my life have been different if back when in my teens and 20s, I thought, hey, it's okay that I feel this way versus that way? If those stigmas weren't there. But how do you coach people dealing with grief? Like, I need to heal from this.
Yeah, and there is so much trauma that they endured, especially in the workforce. Bullied. I mean, I still work with individuals who are in their late 50s, who've been at the same company for years. And prior to coaching, they were horrendously bullied. And now, while working with them, I'm able to teach them how to advocate for themselves and to ask for reasonable accommodations, which they had no knowledge of. And so they took the torment and they took the bullying. And, I do recommend therapy to deal with, that trauma. But I do help them, with the everyday, the present of, how can we move forward and you can flourish, in your career.
Dr. Roger Landry is a preventive medicine physician trained at Tufts University School of Medicine and Harvard University School of Public Health. For nearly 2 decades, his focus has been on empowering older adults to experience a healthy longevity. He is the award-winning author of the book Live Long, Die Short, A Guide to Authentic Health and Successful Aging. Dr. Landry is an inspiring storyteller and presenter. His keynote addresses are powerful, entertaining, and optimistic. Learn more at livelongdieshort.com.
Toni, is there a sort of a guide 101 for someone who is dealing with someone who's neurodiverse to, you know, break down barriers, open doors, make the soil fertile, whatever analogy or metaphor we'd like to. What advice would you give someone?
Yeah, yeah. Autism Speaks has kind of they've gone out of favor with many people with autism, but they truly do have some great toolkits online to help individuals understand their own neurodiverse profiles, characteristics, and behaviors. I also recommend, education, awareness trainings. And also there's so many places like where I still work, like the Association for Autism and Neurodiversity. We have groups for all ages, for older adults, groups of, craft groups, of support groups. So I would highly recommend, getting involved with other individuals, with peers, and definitely learning. But for corporation, companies, family members, there's also groups for them, and if you're a spouse of someone who's neurodivergent, there's groups for them. So there's a lot out there.
Excellent. Good to hear.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit already about job-related trauma and how organizations can work with employees in these different groups. I'm curious if there's maybe a couple of tips for the person who is neurotypical, and they're working in a population where somebody has needs, but maybe that person is afraid to articulate them. Is there something that an employer or an employee can do to make somebody feel more comfortable? Just one or two little tips.
Yeah. Definitely flexible work arrangements. It seems like that is key, because, they lose the bandwidth of energy, to have to engage and interact. Tailored communication, written instructions, or visual aids as opposed to verbal is very important. Sensory friendly environment, leadership support, and employee resource groups for others to, talk about this topic, and having an individual who is willing, to be part of the ERGs who is neurodivergent, I think is, mentorship, coaching, providing regular feedback.
Those are great.
Yeah, you've answered this in some way, this question, but I wanted to put it out there as with a spotlight on it. So, what are many of the misconceptions that people have about neurodiverse people, and how can we address those? And
Sure, yeah, definitely. All neurodivergent people are alike. Okay, that's why they call it a spectrum, right? Especially autism. I work with some of the most brilliant software engineers, and also individuals that have real challenges with just getting out of bed and making a meal and putting on clothes. So it is such a spectrum. Another one is neurodiversity means lower expectations. No. There is challenges, but people want to flourish, right? People want to have purpose and meaning in their lives. People with autism spectrum disorder aren't empathetic. Not true. Expressing empathy and communicating can be a struggle, but they feel so intensely, maybe too much. I love this one. It's a phase or trend. Right? More evaluations, because we become more educated, and we're able to, that's why there's such a growing number, right? Back in the day, I look back at many of my clients that were in institutions. I would say that a large majority of them were autistic. Wow. And they were placed in institutions because it was assumed that they didn't have the cognitive, low intelligence, no cognitive. Many of them were nonverbal. But I believe today they would be diagnosed with autism.
I'm struck by the similarities to what you just said, with how we and the aging services industry approaches older adults, and how the society approaches older adults. They consider them a homogenized group. It's crazy, but older adults. They miss the point many times that these people need purpose. We focus so much on retiree that we figure retirement means no purpose, which we know is destructive. And so much of what you've said, and I alluded to it earlier, seems like it's not readily available, but it's common sense on dealing with humans, because we are all different. but unfortunately, it's not common.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not as intuitive as we would like it, but I'm struck by it. But it's comforting in many ways because there's like a core approach to interpersonal relations.
Mm, so important. So important.
You know, Roger, I was probably thinking the same thing that you were when Toni was talking about members and team members or employees working together. And you were just talking about our older adult population with Masterpiece, where they get the residents involved in all the decision making and setting up the clubs and events, where in some cases you could walk into a retirement community, and if you have an older employee and a resident, you might not know who's who.
Yeah, we use the term senior living community. That's like the jargon now, but many of them are not run like communities, like you just described. That's a community. We're a group of people, like any town or city or anything, and people have different roles, but we're a community and we make it work together. No, again, this is very comforting for me. It takes skills, patience, and your experience to make it work where you work. But to hear it again, it's comforting to me that it isn't for the rest of us. It isn't some extremely esoteric, difficult to understand concept. It's empathy, it's compassion, it's understanding, being open. This is really great stuff, Toni. I don't know you.
Thank you, and I appreciate the
Kudos.
concentration. Yeah, great conversation.
And Dr. Roger, now that you've talked about all the positivity, I'm going to ask a Debbie Downer question,
Yes.
but it's a really important one. What is the impact of mental health when someone feels excluded or misunderstood? And what can we do about it?
Wow, that is a big one, right? First of all, so many individuals, and not only those with autism, but also those with ADHD, low self-esteem, right? Diminished sense of self-worth is huge. Heightened anxiety and depression, social withdrawal, substance use, and lastly, suicidal ideation.
Wow.
And what can we do, Danielle? We can offer support systems, allyship, inclusive spaces, right? And I think education and awareness is so important. You know, we need to get the word out there like you're doing right now.
Yeah, having the conversations. That's one of the things I loved. Toni and I both work with BetterUp and Spring Health as contract coaches, care coaches, and well-being coaches. And in our training, I love the fact that they say, don't be afraid to have those conversations. People avoid them because they're worried it'll make everybody uncomfortable, but those conversations are what's going to make a difference.
Most certainly. I have one more question, and we all grew up on Marvel comics, and it seems like there's a resurgence of Marvel comics with all these superheroes. And so we talked about this before, a skill-based approach. So what are some of the superpowers that you've seen in neurodivergent people?
Yeah, some wonderful, wonderful superpowers such as honesty and sincerity. They'll say it just like it is and be very honest. A lot of integrity, persistence. Many have excellent memory and a strong work ethic, which makes me sad because there are also a large portion population that is underemployed or not working, but they do have such a strong work ethic. Rational, logical explanations, attention to accuracy and detail, and they have to learn cognitively what others learn intuitively.
This sounds like a great resume.
Yeah, right.
Skills, not only for a job, but for society.
Yeah.
Yeah. In conversations, when I talk to people who either are neurodiverse or have a low sense of self-regard for whatever reason, It's getting back to what we've been saying all along, is tapping into the strengths, figuring out what the strengths are. And I do ask them, what's your superpower? And they go, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, you're talking about all the things you lack, but what's your superpower? What things are you good at? And they just brighten up, because Roger, they really does the word somehow is powerful when you say, you're a superhero. What's your superpower? And they're like, what? But it changes the trajectory of the conversation.
Of course it does. I have 4 grandchildren, all athletes, and yet each one is superior at a particular sport. And so I mean, it's just, and we tend to gravitate there if we can, but if the society puts up impediments to us using our superpower, that's where we get into trouble and we hurt people. Well, Toni, we asked a bunch of questions. Do you have things you want to add? Anything we left unsaid, or that you want to tell our listeners?
You asked some wonderful questions. I really appreciate it. I think that my biggest concern is especially for the aging population, specifically individuals with autism. Because there's so many resources and services for early childhood, young individuals, teenagers, transition age to college, but there isn't enough services and supports for those who are older, 50 plus. And all of these youth, they will age, right? And
given if they're lucky.
Yeah, if they're lucky. And so many, reside, even, older adults reside with their parents. And there isn't a safety net. I mean, what will happen when their parents pass away? There needs to be more to offer to those individuals who are aging out.
Well, we work with senior living communities. It sounds like you do also, older adults and Spring Health. If indeed there are resources that are readily out there, some maybe yours, but others, I'm sure that they'd appreciate it. We can attach it to this podcast, right, Danielle? Potential resources, that would be wonderful, because I know a lot of them their heart is in the right place, but they're just not sure exactly how to include neurodivergent people. Probably don't even know the word, and so that would be very helpful. Danielle, anything else?
Yeah, I was going to say, Toni, I want to make sure that people can find you for your coaching and other services. Where can they go to follow your work and learn more about you?
Sure. www.tonibator.com, ToniBator.com. They can find everything about me there, my services, my story. Yeah.
Perfect.
A marvelous story. We thank you so much for giving us the time, talking to us, but even more importantly, for doing what you do. I say this as a Northerner, not as a Southerner. Bless your heart.
I'm a Northerner too. I'm here in Western Massachusetts. Thank you.
I'm in Eastern Massachusetts, so we talk
okay.
same language. So again, thank you for what you do. I know that you're not looking for a sense of purpose. You have definitely found it, and boy, when it's to the benefit of so many people in need, that's got to get you out of bed in the morning, I'm sure.
Well, thank you both so much. This is a wonderful opportunity to, talk about, my passion, what does give me purpose, and helping others. So thank you again.
You've been listening to The Bright Side of Longevity with host and preventive medicine physician and award-winning author Dr. Roger Landry and co-host, nationally board-certified positive psychology and mindfulness coach Danielle Pailly. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.